What happens when one of television's most fearless interviewers sits across from someone who expects softball questions and royal treatment? Well, you're about to find out. And trust me, this gets absolutely explosive. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities who can't handle tough questions. Now, let's get into this incredible clash that had everyone talking. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening, casting their familiar glow across the polished desk where Piers Morgan sat, straightening his tie with the confidence of a man who had interviewed prime ministers, presidents, and plenty of difficult celebrities. His producer had warned him this might be a challenging interview, but Piers thrived on challenges. That's what made him one of the most respected journalists in the business. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special guest, Piers began, his voice carrying that distinctive authority that viewers had come to expect. Someone who has been making headlines around the world, and I'm sure has plenty to say about recent events. Please welcome Meghan Markle. The applause was polite but measured as Meghan walked onto the set, her smile perfectly practiced, her posture radiating the kind of confidence that comes from years of media training. She settled into the guest chair with an air of expectation, clearly anticipating the kind of gentle questioning she had grown accustomed to from most interviewers. "Meghan, thank you for joining us tonight," Piers said, leaning forward slightly, his journalist instincts already reading the room. "I know you've had quite a lot to say recently about your experiences, and I think our viewers would appreciate some honest answers to some direct questions." Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment, barely perceptible, but Piers caught it. "Of course, Piers. I'm always happy to set the record straight and speak my truth." "Your truth," Piers repeated, his eyebrows raising slightly. "That's an interesting phrase you've been using quite a bit lately. But I'm more interested in the truth, if you don't mind, the actual facts." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop a degree. Meghan shifted in her chair, her media training kicking in as she maintained her composure. "I think my truth is the truth, Piers. I've lived through these experiences." "Absolutely, and no one is questioning your experiences," Piers replied smoothly, his tone remaining professional but firm. "However, when you make public statements that contradict documented facts, well, that's where journalism comes in. That's where I come in." Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Piers said, opening the folder in front of him with deliberate precision. "I'm asking direct questions, which is what journalists do. For instance, you've made several claims about your wedding that simply don't align with the public record. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself has clarified that your secret garden ceremony never actually happened as you described it." "That's a private matter," Meghan responded, her voice taking on a slightly defensive edge. "I don't think it's appropriate to discuss the intimate details of my wedding." Piers paused, letting the weight of her response settle in the air. "But you discussed it publicly, Meghan, in great detail, on international television, watched by millions. You can't make public claims and then declare them private when questioned about their accuracy." The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing the shift in dynamics. This wasn't going to be the friendly chat Meghan had clearly expected. "I think you're being unnecessarily aggressive," Meghan said, her smile becoming more strained. "I came here in good faith to have a conversation, not to be attacked." "Asking for factual accuracy isn't an attack," Piers replied calmly, his years of experience evident in how he maintained his composure. "It's journalism. If you make public statements, particularly ones that paint others in a negative light, those statements should be accurate. Wouldn't you agree?" Meghan's hands clasped together in her lap, her knuckles whitening slightly. "I think you're twisting my words." "I'm reading your words," Piers said, holding up a transcript. "These are direct quotes. You said, and I quote, that you were married 3 days before the public ceremony, in a private ceremony in your backyard, with just the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop has since stated that this was not a legal marriage ceremony, but merely a private exchange of vows. Yet you presented it as your actual wedding. Can you explain the discrepancy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's media training was clearly being tested as she struggled to find a response that would maintain her narrative while addressing the factual inconsistency. "I think you're focusing on semantics rather than the emotional truth of what happened," she finally said, her voice carrying a hint of irritation. "The important thing is what it meant to us personally." "Semantics?" Piers leaned back slightly, his expression one of genuine surprise. "Meghan, you told millions of people around the world that you had a secret wedding ceremony. That's not semantics. That's a factual claim. And when the person who supposedly performed that ceremony says it didn't happen as you described, well, that's not semantics either. That's a contradiction that deserves clarification. Meghan's composure was beginning to crack, just slightly, but enough for the experienced interviewer to notice. Her smile had become forced, her posture more rigid. I don't appreciate being called a liar on national television. I haven't called you anything, Piers responded evenly. I've simply asked you to clarify statements you made publicly that appear to contradict the facts. If you feel that's unfair, perhaps you could help our viewers understand where the confusion lies. The tension in the studio was palpable now. What had started as a standard celebrity interview was quickly becoming something much more contentious, and Meghan was clearly unprepared for this level of scrutiny. I think you're being deliberately obtuse, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. You know exactly what I meant. Actually, I don't, Piers replied, his tone remaining professional despite the increasing hostility from his guest. And neither do our viewers. That's why we're having this conversation, to get clarity on these important issues that you've made public. Meghan stood up abruptly, then sat back down, clearly struggling with how to handle the situation. Her team of advisors, visible just off camera, were exchanging worried glances. I came here expecting a fair interview, she said, her voice now carrying a clear edge of anger. Not an interrogation. A fair interview includes fair questions, Piers responded calmly. And fair questions sometimes require uncomfortable answers. That's the nature of journalism, Meghan. Surely you understand that. The battle lines were being drawn, and it was becoming increasingly clear that this interview was heading toward a confrontation that neither side would back down from. The studio atmosphere had shifted completely. What moments ago had been a standard interview setup was now a battlefield of words, with Piers maintaining his journalistic integrity, while Meghan's facade of cooperation was rapidly crumbling. Let's move on to another topic then, Piers said, consulting his notes with the calm professionalism of someone who had navigated thousands of difficult interviews. You've made some very serious allegations about racism within the royal family. These are incredibly damaging accusations that have had global repercussions. Can you provide any specific evidence to support these claims? Meghan's eyes flashed with something between anger and panic. I lived through it, Piers. That should be evidence enough. Personal experience is certainly valid, Piers acknowledged. But when you make accusations of institutional racism against one of the world's most scrutinized families, accusations that have damaged Britain's reputation internationally, surely you can understand why people might want more than just your word? Are you saying I'm lying about racism? Meghan's voice rose significantly, causing several crew members to look up from their equipment. I'm asking for specifics, Piers replied steadily. You've made general accusations, but provided no concrete examples, no witnesses, no documentation. You mentioned conversations about your son's skin color, but you've refused to name who said what, when, or in what context. How can anyone properly address these serious allegations without details? Meghan shifted uncomfortably, her hands now visibly trembling slightly. I protected them by not naming names. I could have, but I chose not to. Protected them? Piers leaned forward, his journalist instincts fully engaged. Meghan, you've accused them of racism on international television. You've painted the entire institution as discriminatory. How is that protection? I didn't name specific individuals. Meghan shot back, her composure slipping further. But you smeared the entire family? Piers countered. You've allowed speculation to run wild, with millions of people around the world now viewing the royals as racist, based solely on your unsubstantiated allegations. Surely you can see how that's problematic? Meghan's media training was failing her completely now. Her breathing had become noticeably faster, her perfect posture replaced by defensive body language. I don't have to prove anything to you or anyone else. My lived experience is valid. Your experience is absolutely valid, Piers agreed, his tone remaining remarkably calm despite the rising tension. But your public accusations have consequences beyond your personal experience. They've damaged relationships between Commonwealth nations. They've hurt people who have dedicated their lives to public service. And they've divided public opinion based on allegations that no one can verify or address properly because you've provided no specifics. So you're blaming me for the reaction to racism? Meghan's voice was now clearly strained, her carefully constructed public persona giving way to raw emotion. I'm asking you to take responsibility for the way you've presented these allegations? Piers responded firmly. If someone treated you the way you've treated the royal family, making vague but damaging accusations without providing specifics or evidence, how would you feel? Meghan stood up again, this time pacing slightly behind her chair. The camera operators adjusted their positions to keep her in frame, while her team looked increasingly concerned. "This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me away in the first place," she said, her voice now carrying a desperate edge. "You're more concerned about protecting the institution than you are about protecting me." "I'm concerned about the truth," Piers replied, his voice steady as a rock. "And the truth is that you've made serious public accusations without providing the evidence needed to substantiate them. That's not protecting anyone, Meghan. That's just responsible journalism." "Responsible journalism?" Meghan laughed bitterly, the sound echoing strangely in the studio. "You're just another member of the British establishment trying to silence me." Piers paused, letting her words hang in the air before responding with measured precision. "Meghan, I've spent my career challenging the establishment, holding powerful people accountable, and asking difficult questions regardless of who might be uncomfortable with them. That's exactly what I'm doing now. By attacking a woman of color who's trying to speak her truth?" Meghan's voice cracked slightly on the last words. "By asking a public figure who has made serious public allegations to provide evidence for those allegations?" Piers corrected. "Your race and gender don't exempt you from scrutiny when you make claims that affect millions of people. Equality means being held to the same standards as everyone else." The words hit Meghan like a physical blow. She stopped pacing and stared at Piers, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to formulate a response. That's completely unfair," she finally managed. "You don't understand what it's like to be in my position." "You're absolutely right," Piers acknowledged. "I don't understand what it's like to be in your position. But I do understand what it's like to be a journalist, and what it's like to be responsible for getting to the truth. And the truth is what our viewers deserve." Meghan returned to her seat, but her body language had completely changed. Gone was the confident, composed woman who had walked onto the set. In her place sat someone who was clearly struggling to maintain control. "Let's talk about your relationship with your father," Piers continued, consulting his notes. "You've publicly estranged yourself from the man who raised you, who paid for your education, who walked you down the aisle at your wedding. Yet you've embraced a family that you claim treated you poorly. Can you help our viewers understand that choice?" "My father betrayed me," Meghan said quickly, too quickly. "He sold stories to the press. He staged photographs. He chose money over his daughter." "He made mistakes," Piers agreed. "But according to several reports, he was also dealing with intense media pressure, health issues, and was trying to manage an impossible situation. Did you ever consider that he might have needed your support rather than your abandonment?" Meghan's face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the full story." "Then tell me the full story," Piers said simply. "Help me understand how a man who sacrificed so much for your success suddenly became someone you could completely cut out of your life." "He made his choices," Meghan said, her voice becoming cold. "And I made mine." "Even after his heart attack? Even when he was clearly struggling?" Piers pressed. "You chose to maintain your relationship with a father-in-law you barely knew over the man who raised you?" The question clearly hit home. Meghan's composure cracked completely, tears forming in her eyes. But they seemed more like tears of frustration than genuine emotion. "You're being cruel," she whispered. "I'm being honest," Piers replied gently but firmly. "And sometimes honesty is uncomfortable, but it's necessary." The interview had reached a breaking point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The studio had become a pressure cooker, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan sat rigid in her chair, tears of frustration glistening in her eyes, while Piers maintained the steady professionalism that had made him one of television's most respected interviewers. "Meghan," Piers said softly, his tone shifting to something more compassionate without losing its journalistic edge. "I understand this is difficult, but these are questions that millions of people are asking. If you're going to make public statements that affect so many lives, surely you can understand why those statements need to be examined?" "Examined or attacked?" Meghan shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. "Because there's a difference, and you've crossed that line. I've asked you for evidence to support serious allegations you've made publicly," Piers replied calmly. "I've asked you to explain contradictions in your statements. I've asked you about relationships you've discussed openly in other interviews. These aren't attacks, Meghan. These are the questions any responsible journalist would ask." Meghan wiped at her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup. You're just like all the rest of them. You can't stand that I spoke out, that I refused to stay silent and just take it." "Actually, I admire people who speak out," Piers said, leaning back slightly. "I've built my career on speaking out, on challenging authority, on refusing to accept easy answers. But speaking out comes with responsibility. It means being prepared to defend your statements, to provide evidence for your claims, and to face scrutiny. That's the price of having a platform. I don't need to defend my lived experience to you or anyone else," Meghan declared, her voice rising to near shouting levels. Several crew members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with how heated the exchange had become. "But you do need to defend public allegations that damage other people's reputations," Piers countered firmly. "You've accused people of racism without providing specifics. You've claimed you were denied help for mental health issues, but the palace has records showing multiple resources were offered to you. You've painted yourself as a victim while cutting off family members who supported you for years. These aren't personal experiences happening in private, Meghan. These are public statements with public consequences." Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. "I'm done with this. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who clearly has an agenda. My only agenda is the truth," Piers replied, remaining seated, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting in front of him. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should ask yourself why." "Because you're twisting everything I say," Meghan practically screamed, her composure completely shattered now. "You're taking my words out of context, you're minimizing my experiences, and you're more concerned about protecting a racist institution than you are about justice." "I'm asking for evidence of racism," Piers said, his voice becoming firmer. "You keep calling it a racist institution, but you haven't provided a single concrete example. You've made vague allegations about conversations regarding your son's skin color, but you won't say who said what, when, or in what context. How is anyone supposed to address these allegations properly without details?" Meghan began gathering her things from the small table beside her chair, her hands shaking with rage. "I don't have to prove anything to you. The very fact that you're demanding proof shows exactly the kind of person you are." "The kind of person who believes in evidence-based reporting?" Piers asked, his eyebrows raised. "The kind of person who thinks serious allegations should be backed up with facts?" "Yes, Meghan, that's exactly the kind of person I am. That's what journalists are supposed to be." "You're not a journalist," Meghan spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're a bully with a television show who gets off on tearing people down." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Piers remained calm, but there was a flash of something steel-like in his eyes. "Meghan," he said quietly, "I've interviewed terrorists, dictators, and some of the most dangerous people on earth. I've held prime ministers accountable, exposed corruption, and challenged some of the most powerful institutions in the world. If asking you to provide evidence for public allegations you've made makes me a bully, then I'm proud to be one." Meghan's face contorted with fury. "How dare you compare me to terrorists and dictators?" "I'm not comparing you to anyone," Piers replied evenly. "I'm explaining that difficult questions are part of serious journalism, regardless of who's sitting in that chair. You don't get special treatment because you're upset, or because you've decided that scrutiny equals bullying." "This interview is over," Meghan announced, standing and removing her microphone with shaking hands. "I won't be subjected to this kind of treatment." "You're certainly free to leave," Piers said, making no move to stop her. "But walking away when faced with difficult questions doesn't make those questions go away. It just makes you look like you can't answer them." Meghan froze halfway to removing her microphone, Piers's words clearly hitting their mark. For a moment, it seemed like she might sit back down and attempt to regain control of the situation. Instead, she ripped the microphone off completely, the sound of the connection breaking, creating a harsh feedback noise through the studio speakers. "You know what?" she said, her voice now cold and calculated. "This whole thing is going to backfire on you. People will see this for what it really is. A powerful man using his platform to attack a woman who dared to speak truth to power. They'll see a journalist asking legitimate questions of a public figure who made serious public allegations." Piers replied calmly, "And they'll see someone who couldn't answer those questions walking away rather than facing scrutiny. Let the viewers decide what that means." Meghan grabbed her purse and headed toward the exit, but turned back one final time. "You're going to regret this, Piers. This isn't over." "It never is," Piers replied, watching her go. "Truth has a way of coming out eventually, regardless of who tries to suppress it." As Meghan stormed off the set, her team scrambling to follow her. Piers turned back to the camera with remarkable composure. "Well," he said, straightening his tie, "I think that speaks for itself, doesn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, when public figures make serious public allegations, they should be prepared to defend those allegations with facts, not emotional manipulation or accusations of bullying when faced with legitimate questions." He paused, looking directly into the camera with the authority of someone who had just demonstrated exactly why journalism matters. That's what we do here. We ask the questions that need to be asked, even when they're uncomfortable, even when people don't want to answer them, because the truth matters more than anyone's comfort level. The studio fell silent except for the quiet hum of equipment, leaving viewers with a crystal clear picture of what had just unfolded. A masterclass in journalism, meeting a masterclass in evasion, with only one person left standing when the dust settled. And there you have it. Sometimes the most revealing moments happen not when people answer questions, but when they refuse to answer them. What did you think about this incredible confrontation? Hit that subscribe button if you want more content like this, and let me know in the comments. Do you think public figures should be held accountable for the allegations they make, or should they be given a free pass? I'd love to hear your thoughts.